Tonight, we journey into a secret older than Rome itself, a code buried beneath centuries of stone, ink, and silence. The Epic of Gilgamesh, a story of gods, floods, and immortal quests, was not merely preserved, it was hidden, fractured, and rewritten to survive the eyes of the powerful. The Vatican did not simply lock away its treasures, they encoded them into labyrinths, altars, chants, and shadowed archives, weaving a map across Europe that only the initiated could read. And the truths it holds are not stories of the past alone. They challenge our understanding of time, of memory, and of the very foundations of civilization. Those who sought the tablets, the rituals, and the lost lines faced corridors of silence, doors that could only be opened with a secret song, and shadows that remembered what humanity had nearly forgotten. And those who glimpsed the code? Many disappeared without a trace, their discoveries swallowed by centuries of carefully measured obscurity. So before you dare to follow, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, because what lies ahead is a path through history unlike anything you have ever seen, where the past itself may still speak to those who know how to listen. They say, beneath the marble floors of St. Peter's Basilica, below the Vatican's deepest archive, there is a door that does not appear on any official plan. It has no hinges, no handle, no visible seams. It looks like part of the wall, until the torchlight hits it just right and the outline glows faintly in gold dust. According to legend, it was sealed not during the Renaissance, but far earlier, in a time when Rome still remembered Babylon. Behind that wall, they say, lies an alcove older than Christianity itself, and within it, tablets written not in Latin, but in the language of kings who lived before the flood. The name carved upon them is one the Church has never spoken aloud, Gilgamesh. For centuries, whispers about these tablets have drifted through the halls of the Vatican. Archivists dismissed them as myth, yet small traces keep surfacing, strange catalogue numbers erased from records, fragments of clay inscriptions that appear briefly in inventories and then vanish. One Jesuit scholar in the early 1600s wrote that a collection of antediluvian relics had been brought to Rome from the East for study, but his letter was found with its date scratched out and the signature removed. What could have been so dangerous about ancient writing that it had to be sealed beneath the heart of the Church? When you picture the Vatican, you see light streaming through stained glass, choirs singing, and endless rows of books guarded by silence. But under that beauty lies something else. A labyrinth of vaults carved into stone, each level older than the one above. The lowest chambers predate the basilica. They were once part of a Roman necropolis, a city of the dead. It was there, among the tombs, that workers centuries ago stumbled upon bricks engraved with wedge shapes, the mark of Mesopotamia. They were told to stop digging, and the tunnel was sealed. Officially, no one ever found anything. Unofficially, guards were posted at night for years after. Some say the Pope at that time ordered a secret excavation under the pretext of repairing the foundations. What they brought up was never shown to the public. The few who claimed to have seen it spoke of clay so dark it reflected no light, etched with symbols that pulsed faintly as if alive. One described it as a message from a world before memory. Others said it carried a curse, not of death, but of knowledge too vast for faith to contain. And so the door was built, thick with lime and lead, the entrance erased from every map. Today, that place is still forbidden. Even the modern archivists avoid it, calling it the door beneath St. Peter's. Yet, the idea refuses to die. Every few decades, someone hears a rumour of strange tablets in the restricted archives, of scholars silenced for asking about a Sumerian hero who sought eternal life. Perhaps it is only myth, another ghost story hidden beneath marble and prayer, or perhaps beneath the city of saints, an older truth still waits in the dark, written in a language no one alive is meant to read. They call it the Dark Ages, 1,000 years where the lights of reason went out, where people forgot how to think beyond the church, and where history seemed to fall silent. But what if that silence was not ignorance at all? What if it was designed? Imagine a fog stretching over Europe, thick and deliberate, not born of chaos but crafted to hide something that should never have disappeared. For centuries, people have accepted the idea that civilization simply paused after the fall of Rome in the year 476, and then somehow woke again with the Renaissance nearly 1,000 years later. But can a continent filled with builders, philosophers, astronomers, and mathematicians truly forget everything? The more you look at the record, the stranger it becomes. Libraries burned, languages rewritten, inventions erased. Yet the pattern feels too clean, too controlled, as if someone had drawn a curtain across history. In this darkness, the only light left was the church, and that light illuminated only what it wanted people to see. The monks who copied texts decided which books survived. The priests who preached decided what truths were remembered. And in that narrowing of memory, entire worlds vanished. Mesopotamian science, Sumerian astronomy, Babylonian medicine, gone as if they never existed. But if you dig deep enough, the echoes remain. Strange Latin notes inside old theological manuscripts that reference star maps never found in Europe. Marginal drawings that show ziggurats standing beside crosses. Why would such images appear in holy books written centuries after those empires fell, unless someone still remembered them, quietly, secretly, preserving what others tried to erase? During those silent centuries, nothing truly stopped. Knowledge simply went underground. In hidden monasteries, guarded by men who feared both God and discovery, fragments of the ancient world were stored away. The Vatican's scribes called them dangerous curiosities, works of a fallen people, yet they did not destroy them, they locked them away. Every generation since has inherited the silence that followed. Historians tell us the Dark Ages were filled with superstition and poverty, but even the absence of evidence becomes its own clue. How can so little remain from so long? It is almost as if time itself was edited, cut, and rearranged to create a story where Europe appears lost until faith found it again. And if that is true, then the Dark Ages were never an age of darkness. They were an age of hiding, when light was kept behind stone walls and truth was renamed heresy. Perhaps the knowledge of the ancient world, from the rivers of Mesopotamia to the temples of Uruk, was not destroyed but buried, waiting for a future that could understand it. When the world finally emerged into the Renaissance, it did not discover new light. It uncovered what had been covered before. The silence had ended, not because humanity advanced, but because the keepers of time decided to lift the fog. And somewhere in that 1,000-year gap, the Code of Gilgamesh, the memory of the first king to chase immortality, was quietly removed from public time. In the winter of 1596, a Jesuit scholar named Father Lorenzo died in a small room near the Vatican Library. He had spent 40 years cataloguing ancient manuscripts, copying faded ink onto new parchment, and maintaining the order of the Church's growing mountain of knowledge. But on his deathbed, he broke the silence that had kept him bound all his life. His confession was short, written in trembling Latin on the back of a prayer sheet, and it mentioned something no one expected to find in Rome, a crate marked AUR-URUK. The words meant nothing to the priests who found it, but to historians today they echo like thunder. Ore, the ancient word for gold. Uruk, the oldest city of kings, home of Gilgamesh. The confession said the crate arrived from the east, sent by a missionary returning from the ruins of Babylon. It was delivered to a private chamber within the Vatican during the Counter-Reformation, a time when the Church was desperate to control every version of truth. The crate was said to contain tablets, sealed in pitch and wrapped in linen, each one covered in strange markings that no one could read. Father Lorenzo wrote that when the lid was opened, the air smelled of burned earth and oil, and the light in the room seemed to dim. The cardinal overseeing the examination ordered everyone to remain silent. The next day, the crate and its contents disappeared. Officially, it never existed. Yet, in the archives, a faint record remains. A shipment logged in the same year with no origin, no description, and a note beside it that reads, "Transferred to special custody." After Lorenzo's death, rumours spread among the younger archivists. Some said the tablets contained a story of the first flood, older than Genesis, one that named Gilgamesh not as a myth, but as a witness to forgotten events. Others believed the writing described the gods as rulers of flesh, not spirit. Whatever truth lay inside, the Church could not risk it being known. The Counter-Reformation was not only a war of faith, it was a war of information. Every artifact, every text that might challenge the Church's story of creation was locked away or destroyed, yet the crate survived. Centuries later, a scholar cataloguing sealed archive inventories found a faded note in the same handwriting as Lorenzo's confession. It contained only 4 words: "The son of Uruk sleeps." No one knows what it means. Perhaps it refers to the golden glow of the tablets, or perhaps to something buried deeper, a secret the Jesuit could no longer carry. Some say that even now, beneath the Vatican's marble halls, the crate still lies untouched, its clay inscribed with a message from a civilization that refused to die. And maybe, just maybe, Father Lorenzo's last breath was not one of guilt, but of warning, whispered to a world that still sleeps while the truth waits in darkness. Most clay tablets crumble with time. Fire cracks them, water erases them. Yet the fragments, said to come from the crate of Uruk, did something no historian could explain. They refused to burn. In the late 1700s, during restoration work in a Roman cellar belonging to an old Jesuit house, workers discovered shards of blackened clay mixed with ancient linen. The fragments were small, no bigger than coins, but their surface shimmered faintly as if coated in glass. When one was placed near a flame, it did not redden or turn to dust. It simply absorbed the heat and cooled again. No kiln from Mesopotamia or from medieval Europe could have produced such a thing. The clay contained traces of bitumen, a thick tar drawn from deep beneath the earth, the same material used to seal boats in the Age of Gilgamesh. But the strange part was its binding pattern. Under a microscope, the layers were fused by alternating heat and pressure, creating a texture harder than iron yet lighter than stone. Whoever made these tablets wanted them to last forever. When word of the discovery reached the Vatican, the fragments were quietly taken away. The workers were told they had found remnants of burned pottery, nothing more. But one of them, an apprentice named Matteo, remembered that, as the pieces were lifted into the crate, the air filled with a faint scent of oil and ash. He later said it was like breathing ancient smoke. Years passed, and no one spoke of it again, until a scholar in the early 1900s found a matching sample in a private collection. It was labelled clay of unknown origin. Tests showed it was nearly 6,000 years old, far older than any Roman artifact. Embedded in its surface were patterns that looked like cuneiform, but when traced carefully, the lines revealed something else, a spiral rhythm, almost musical, as if the symbols had been arranged to resonate rather than to be read. Scientists called it coincidence. The Church called it curiosity. But to those who knew the legend of Gilgamesh, it was proof that someone in the ancient world had learned to make clay that could outlive fire. The same material that once sealed the walls of Uruk might have been used to preserve its king's words through every flood and every purge. It is said the fragments that survived were part of a larger tablet describing the building of a gate, a door made of earth that would never decay. Some believe that the Vatican's hidden tablet, the one Father Lorenzo mentioned, was created using this method, designed to survive anything man or nature could destroy. Perhaps that is why it still rests sealed behind stone, waiting for a time when humanity is ready to read what it says. Until then, it endures, silent but unbroken, the message of a world that learned how to speak across eternity. The first time the name appears in Latin manuscripts, it is not written as Gilgamesh, it is written as Gilgamesh, a single misplaced letter, easy to miss, yet it marks the start of a long trail of deliberate confusion. Across medieval Europe, scholars copied texts by hand, and every mark of ink carried both meaning and mystery. Marginal notes, side comments, and translations became the secret fingerprints of those who dared to remember what was forbidden. In the margins of an 11th century psalter found in northern France, the word Gilgamesh sits beside a passage describing a giant who sought eternal life. The handwriting matches that of a monk known for translating Eastern texts into Latin. His other notes reference Shinar, and a river that runs backward in time. None of these belong to biblical geography. The Church labelled them apocryphal and erased them from later copies, but similar traces reappear again in other places, each time the name slightly altered. Galgamos in Spain, Gilgma in Italy, Gilgamesh again in Germany. It is as if the name itself was walking through time, changing clothes to survive. The more it shifted, the harder it became to connect the fragments, and perhaps that was the point. During the 13th century, the Vatican tightened its control over all recorded history. Scribes were ordered to destroy or rewrite any text that blended pagan myth with Christian doctrine. But some monks believed the story of Gilgamesh was not a myth at all. They saw him as the prototype of humanity's search for truth, a man who challenged the gods not out of rebellion, but to understand creation. To preserve the memory, they disguised his name in prayers, hymns, and even astronomical charts. One medieval star map shows a constellation called Gilma aligned with Orion, drawn not in stars, but in coded numerals. In Latin, the name means nothing, but when read through an ancient Sumerian cipher, it translates to the same phrase found on tablets from Uruk, "He who saw the deep." It is impossible to know how many times the name was altered or why it persisted when so much else was lost. Some believe it travelled with secret orders of monks who saw in Gilgamesh the symbol of human endurance, a reminder that even kings die, but words can survive. Others think it was the church itself that preserved the name, hiding it in plain sight, a quiet acknowledgement of a truth too old to erase. Every time it appears, the ink grows thinner, the letters fewer, until the final trace, Gilgma, nothing more than a whisper of a name once spoken beneath Babylon's Sunday. Yet even that whisper was enough. The legend continued to breathe through the pens of men who feared to speak it aloud. It is said that names carry power. Perhaps that is why this one refused to fade. Because some names are not written to be remembered, they are written so that forgetting them becomes impossible. Long before Noah, long before the Ark of Genesis, there was another flood. Its story lies carved into clay, older than any scripture, written in the language of Sumer. The tale of Gilgamesh speaks of a great deluge that wiped away all life, but hidden within the poetry are numbers, angles, and celestial names that do not belong to mythology, they belong to astronomy. When scholars first translated the tablets in the 19th century, they noticed star references that seemed misplaced. Mentions of the bull of heaven, the lion, and the scorpion were dismissed as symbols of gods. Yet, when astronomers charted those same constellations backward in time, they aligned not with legend, but with real skies, as they appeared over Mesopotamia more than 10,000 years ago. The positions mark an event, not a metaphor, a flood written as both memory and measurement. The ancients did not simply tell stories, they recorded time through the movement of the stars. The flood before the flood was not only a disaster, it was a clock resetting itself. Hidden in the verses about storms and darkness are patterns of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts the stars across the sky over millennia. Every 12,000 years, the heavens change their face. The Sumerians knew this and encoded it in their myths so the next age would remember. When the Vatican translators in the 16th century studied similar texts, They found these same patterns, but left them out of their official editions. The explanation was that they were irrelevant to faith, but perhaps it was something deeper, a story that could track time before written history would challenge the timeline of creation itself. In one surviving fragment, the flood begins not with rain, but with light. A star rises where it should not be, followed by trembling in the earth. The poet calls it the tearing of heaven's river, but modern science calls it the crossing of a comet. The Sumerians described it as the hand of the gods sweeping the world clean. The story of Gilgamesh's flood may have been both warning and record, a message sent through ages disguised as devotion. The church could not destroy it, but it could disguise it further. In the medieval period, certain flood sermons began to include star imagery nearly identical to that found on the tablets. The serpent in the sky, the man who measures the waves, the dove that flies between constellations. Each detail rephrased but never lost. The flood before the flood became the foundation of every later myth, reshaped until only its moral remained. Yet, when you strip away the doctrine and read the stars themselves, the message becomes clear. The ancients were not telling us how humanity was punished. They were telling us when humanity began again. And if the tablets were right, the cycle of the heavens will one day return to that same alignment. Another flood, not of water but of memory, washing away the stories we were taught and revealing the clock that has always been hidden inside them. There is a strange familiarity in the way cathedrals rise. Their towers pierce the sky, their foundations mirror the heavens, and their halls stretch like stairways between earth and eternity. Yet, if you trace the geometry of those stones, you find something unexpected. The same mathematical ratios that shaped the ziggurat of Etemenanke, the great temple of Babylon, appear again in the blueprints of Christian cathedrals built more than 2,000 years later. The angles of their walls, the proportions of their naves, even the placement of their altars echo the steps of that ancient structure, once called the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Builders in medieval Europe claimed divine inspiration, but perhaps what they followed was not revelation but memory. The ziggurat of Babylon was not merely a temple. It was a map of the sky in brick and bitumen, each level dedicated to a planet, each stair marking the ascent from the mortal to the divine. When Rome fell, its architects scattered, carrying fragments of ancient design across the world. In time, those fragments found their way into church plans approved by the Vatican. The cross itself, when drawn over a cathedral floor, aligns perfectly with the celestial grid of Uruk. The intersection where the nave meets the transept matches the rising point of Venus, the same star that guided Sumerian priests in their nightly rituals. It is as if the cathedrals were not built to honour new gods, but to continue the dialogue of the old ones, translated into stone. Historians call it coincidence, the inevitable repetition of geometry. But coincidence does not explain why the distance between many cathedral towers equals the same ratio used to measure the base of Etemenanke. Nor does it explain why the earliest builders of Notre Dame described the site as the navel of the world, the same title once given to the ziggurat's summit. Beneath layers of faith and centuries of translation, the sacred architecture of the West may be older than anyone admits. It carries the same cosmic order that the Sumerians mapped when the first cities were born. Some scholars whisper that the church knew that early priests, many trained in astronomy and ancient mathematics, recognized these patterns but kept silent, understanding their power to link heaven and earth in perfect proportion. They built the cross over the ziggurat, the chapel over the temple, not to destroy what came before, but to absorb it. The message hidden in stone is simple and eternal. To reach heaven, one must climb the same invisible staircase, whether in Uruk or in Rome, and when sunlight filters through the cathedral windows at dawn, striking the altar exactly as it once struck the top of Etemenanke, the past flickers alive again. The stones remember, even if we have forgotten. There is a hymn within the Vatican's oldest songbooks, that no one can trace to its composer. It has no name, no date, only a short note in faded Latin that reads, "Sung once each century, for remembrance." When played today, it sounds like any other Gregorian chant, slow, sorrowful, and endlessly repeating. But deep within its rhythm lies a pattern that does not belong to medieval Europe. In the late 1950s, a linguist named Amalia Werner noticed that the hymn's structure, its rise and fall, matched perfectly with the meter of ancient Sumerian lamentations discovered in the ruins of Ur. The sequence of beats was not random. It followed a mathematical pulse used by temple priests over 4,000 years ago. At first, scholars dismissed it as coincidence, until Werner counted the intervals between notes and realized they formed a numeric key. When those numbers were aligned on a cipher wheel, they produced a spiral sequence identical to one used for encoding names in cuneiform tablets. The hymn, it seemed, was more than a prayer. It was a code, hidden in sound. What it encodes, no one fully knows. Some suspect it preserves the coordinates of a star alignment. Others believe it opens a numerical sequence that matches the timing of the flood described in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Church, when questioned, denied knowledge of such origins. Yet the hymn remains, copied faithfully through centuries of reform. Choirs still sing it on rare occasions, unaware that each note might be transmitting an ancient message across time. The Sumerians believed music was the language of creation, that sound could build or destroy worlds depending on its harmony. They wrote their laments for the fallen city of Ur in precise rhythm because they thought the correct cadence could speak directly to the gods. When that same rhythm appears in a Christian hymn written thousands of years later, one must ask, who carried it across the ages? During the 12th century, Jesuit scholars studied these chants while experimenting with musical mathematics, searching for divine order in sound. Some of their notebooks mention ratios that match the Sumerian scales almost exactly. They understood that music could encode information the eye could never see. So perhaps the hymn was planted intentionally, not as blasphemy, but as preservation, a way to keep a fragment of the world's first civilization alive beneath layers of faith. Each century it is sung, a door opens briefly, and the melody vibrates through the same frequencies once used in Uruk's temples. Those who have stood inside the Vatican's choir loft during its rare performance say they feel the air shift, as if the walls themselves remember a voice older than Latin. The hymn without a choir is not meant for an audience. It is meant for the vaults, for the silence, for the clay that still listens below. Somewhere within its tone, the ancient code still moves, humming softly beneath the name of God. If you place the map of medieval Europe over the map of ancient Mesopotamia, something strange begins to appear. The roads that carried pilgrims to holy shrines follow the same lines as the trade routes that once connected Uruk, Ur, and Babylon. It is as if someone drew the new world upon the bones of the old one. When modern researchers traced these routes with satellite precision, they found an invisible grid running across continents, and at each intersection stood a shrine, a cathedral, or a monastery. Every one of them, when measured by latitude and angle, aligns with a star named in the tablets of Gilgamesh. The pattern is too perfect to be chance. In the epic, Gilgamesh's journey to seek immortality is guided by constellations. Each god he meets is represented by a point in the sky. The same points, when mirrored upon the earth, form the exact network of roads and holy sites later blessed by the Vatican. Scholars try to explain it as coincidence or divine geometry, yet the more they compare, the clearer the design becomes. The oldest pilgrim path, from Canterbury to Rome, bends slightly east at the same degree as the path between Uruk and Eridu. The great cathedrals of Chartres, Cologne, and Milan stand upon the same celestial meridian as the belt of Orion. It is as though the builders of the Christian world followed a star map written long before their faith existed. Some say the map draws itself, that no one consciously planned it. But records from the 12th century tell another story. A monk named Theophilus wrote of secret maps carried by architects who claimed to possess the chart of heaven upon the earth. The church allowed their work but never revealed their sources. What if those maps were not of Europe at all, but copies of something older, rediscovered and repurposed to give divine order to new lands? If the grid of stars mirrored in stone and road was intentional, it would mean the entire structure of the Christian world was built upon Sumerian design. The temples of Uruk became cathedrals. The processional ways of Babylon became pilgrim paths. Even the holy city of Rome rests upon coordinates that correspond to the star Enlil, the same point marking the gate to eternity in the Gilgamesh tablets. The Vatican archives contain a document known only by its code, Astrum 17, which some believe charts these alignments. Access to it is forbidden. Only fragments of description survive, noting a heavenly measure imposed upon the earth. Perhaps this was not just architecture, it was communication, a signal encoded in geography itself. The ancients may have believed that the gods could only find them if the world reflected the heavens. By repeating that pattern, medieval builders unknowingly revived a forgotten system, one that turned the earth into a mirror of the sky. And somewhere within that reflection, the old memory of Uruk still moves, tracing its path through every stone road, every tower, every prayer whispered along the map that continues to draw itself. In a small chapel in southern France stands a statue of the Virgin Mary, unlike any other. Her skin is carved from dark wood, her eyes deep and solemn, her robe painted with faint traces of gold stars. She is called the Black Madonna, and thousands come to pray before her each year. But few know that her design predates Christianity by millennia. Beneath the layers of paint and devotion hides something older, something from the sands of Mesopotamia. When art historians examined the earliest depictions of the Black Madonna across Europe, they noticed symbols that do not belong to biblical tradition. A crescent beneath her feet, a lion at her side, and a tree carved behind her throne. The crescent, lion, and cedar were all sacred emblems of the goddess Inanna, the queen of heaven in the city of Uruk. In ancient carvings, Inanna stands upon a lion, crowned by a crescent moon, holding the cedar branch that links heaven and earth. When the goddess vanished from memory, her image survived, renamed and sanctified under a new faith. The Virgin Mary became her reflection, clothed in the same iconography, but reinterpreted to fit a world that no longer worshipped stars. The Church never denied the resemblance, but it never explained it either. Some theologians called it divine coincidence. Others whispered that early Christian artists absorbed local symbols to convert pagans. Yet the repetition is too precise. The proportions of the Madonna's face match those of Sumerian idols found near the ruins of Uruk. Even her title, Queen of Heaven, is the same phrase once sung to Inanna in temples thousands of years before. How could these parallels remain so perfect unless the image itself had been passed down through hidden hands? During the 4th century, when Christianity rose to power, the Church absorbed countless ancient symbols, blending them into its own stories. But some symbols carried more than aesthetic beauty. They carried memory. The Black Madonna may have been one of these, a silent bridge between two civilizations. Beneath her gaze, the prayers of the faithful still rise, unaware that the face they worship might once have belonged to another deity entirely. When the Vatican studied the phenomenon in the early 20th century, it quietly gathered reports of every Black Madonna in Europe. There were over 400. Many stood on sites that were once pagan temples. Some even aligned with constellations linked to the planet Venus, the star of Inanna. A few researchers believed this was deliberate, that the architects of faith had preserved the old goddess by giving her a new name and a softer story. If that is true, then the Black Madonna is not merely a Christian icon. She is the last living memory of Uruk, the final embodiment of the goddess who refused to fade. Her dark colour is not a symbol of race or region. It is the color of ancient cedar and bitumen, the same materials that once sealed the sacred tablets of Gilgamesh. And as candles flicker before her, they cast shadows that stretch backward through time, reaching to the city where divinity first took human form. In the archives of the Vatican Observatory, there lies a small leather journal belonging to a Jesuit scholar named Father Matteo Ricciardi. He lived in the early 1600s, a time when the Church controlled both the heavens and the narrative written beneath them. His handwriting is neat, his language restrained, but between the lines of scripture and study hides something extraordinary. Ricciardi's notes reveal that he quietly altered the architectural plans of several cathedrals across Europe. He did not change their appearance or their faith. He changed the way they faced the sky. The journal records his calculations of equinox dawns, the moments when sunlight passes through stained glass at precise angles. He adjusted window placements so that beams of light would fall upon specific symbols within the churches, not randomly, but according to an ancient pattern he called the Uruk star code. No one in Rome at the time knew what that meant. Modern historians believe Ricciardi had somehow rediscovered the same stellar alignment system used in Mesopotamian temples. The ziggurats of Uruk were once aligned to mark the rising of Venus, the planet sacred to Inanna and the timekeeper of the Sumerian calendar. Ricciardi's cathedrals followed that same rhythm. At sunrise on the spring equinox, golden light would touch the altar exactly as the first rays struck the summit of the Temple of Etemenanke 5,000 years earlier. It was as if he was restoring a forgotten harmony between heaven and earth. When his superiors asked about his methods, Ricciardi claimed he sought perfection in divine proportion, a term safe enough to quiet suspicion, but his journal tells a different story. He wrote of a pattern older than Rome, a song written in light, and of his belief that the ancients had already mapped the face of God in the sky. He feared that revealing this would destroy his order, so he encoded his work in mathematics and music, a language only another astronomer could read. Generations later, his calculations were rediscovered during a renovation at the Vatican Observatory. The angles matched those used in the oldest cathedrals from France to Spain. Every window, every beam of glass, directed sunlight not only toward the cross, but toward the stars that once guided Gilgamesh on his journey. It is said that Ricciardi's final entry was written the night before his death. He described standing inside a cathedral at dawn, watching a single beam of sunlight cut through the darkness and strike a golden disc hidden behind the altar. In that moment, he wrote, the light became a bridge to the past. He understood then that faith and knowledge were never enemies. They were reflections of the same celestial order, one that began long before Christianity, when priests of Uruk first looked up and saw eternity in motion. Perhaps Ricciardi was not rebelling against the church at all. Perhaps he was simply reminding it where its light truly came from. In the year 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced a new calendar to replace the Julian one that had guided Europe for more than 1,000 years. The reason was said to be small errors in measuring the solar year, a correction of mere minutes that had slowly shifted holy days away from their intended seasons. But what if that change hid something far larger? What if the missing 10 days and the quiet reshaping of time were not just mathematical corrections, but the continuation of a much older design? Hidden among the Vatican's astronomical archives are notes written by Jesuit observers who charted eclipses between the years 600 and 900. The strange part is that none of those eclipses match the actual paths calculated by modern astronomy. In some cases, the records show an eclipse where the sky should have been clear. In others, they skip events that certainly occurred. When these errors are plotted on a timeline, a pattern forms. The dates stretch like elastic, as though extra centuries were quietly inserted into history. This idea, known among a few researchers as the phantom calendar, suggests that parts of our timeline were expanded to align with a sacred rhythm, a cosmic clock reaching back to Sumer. The Sumerians tracked time not by seasons, but by celestial alignments. Every cycle of Venus and the moon was tied to the rhythm of gods. According to fragments found in Uruk, there would come a great alignment when all heavenly markers would return to their beginning, signalling renewal. For that moment to occur within the lifetime of the Church, the calendar itself would need to be adjusted. Some whisper that when the Vatican reformed time, it did more than fix the date of Easter. It ensured that the next grand alignment would fall under papal authority. That way, if heaven repeated its cycle, the Church would be ready to claim it as divine proof. The phantom calendar may sound impossible, yet traces of its manipulation remain everywhere. Ancient eclipses recorded in Babylon and China align perfectly with modern predictions, but those listed in European monastic annals drift hundreds of years out of sync. Historians call this clerical error. Astronomers are not so sure. Even a single misplaced century could explain why certain saints, kings, and wars appear duplicated across records. It would mean history itself had been folded to keep the sacred order intact. In his final letters, a Vatican astronomer named Giacomo Alberti wrote of a day when the sun and moon would stand still above Rome as they once did above Uruk. He hinted that time had been stretched like parchment to bring that day within reach. If he was right, then our entire chronology may be a grand illusion, a framework built to synchronize human faith with the motion of the stars. And perhaps, when the next great alignment comes, the clock of Uruk will strike once more, its shadow falling perfectly upon the dome of St. Peter's, just as planned centuries ago. In a side chapel of an old basilica near Ravenna stands a marble altar, its surface polished smooth by centuries of ritual. To the eye, it seems ordinary, just another relic of medieval devotion. But when light strikes it at a certain angle, faint grooves shimmer across the stone, lines too fine to have been carved by hand. In the early 1970s, an art restorer noticed them while cleaning candle soot. He thought they were scratches until he shifted the lamp and saw that the grooves formed deliberate shapes, tiny wedge marks like those found on Sumerian tablets. Under magnification, the pattern became undeniable. The altar mensa, the very table on which priests once placed the Eucharist, was etched with microscopic cuneiform. When scholars traced the marks, they discovered they corresponded not to random text, but to missing sections of the Epic of Gilgamesh, lines absent from every known tablet. It was as if someone had hidden the lost verses in plain sight, encoded into sacred stone. The Vatican quickly sealed the chapel for restoration, citing structural instability. Access was denied to independent researchers. But before the site was closed, one archaeologist managed to photograph part of the surface. When the image was enhanced, the faint symbols translated to a strange phrase: "The flood returns not to destroy, but to remember." The meaning was unclear, but the handwriting of history was not. These were Sumerian signs, arranged with mathematical precision. No medieval craftsman could have written them. The grooves were too shallow, less than a grain of sand deep, carved by a tool that seemed more modern than ancient. Some whispered that the altar had been recut from an older stone, perhaps a slab once taken from Mesopotamia. During the Crusades, relics from the East flooded into Europe, often unrecorded, often repurposed. It is possible that a tablet fragment was ground down, its inscriptions preserved, just beneath the surface, its story buried beneath centuries of prayer. The idea is unsettling, that priests for generations consecrated bread and wine upon the words of Gilgamesh himself. When light reveals the grooves, it is as though the stone awakens, remembering what it once carried. Scientists who later examined fragments claimed the lines aligned perfectly with the lunar map used by Sumerian astronomers, turning the altar into both text and instrument. Perhaps it was meant as an index, guiding those who knew the code to reconstruct the missing tablet lines. If so, then the builders of that chapel were not merely masons. They were archivists, preserving forbidden knowledge in a form no one would suspect. Every Mass that followed became a ritual of remembrance, even if no one knew what was being remembered. The stone still stands, silent and heavy, its secret waiting beneath the thin polish of time. And when the morning sun enters through the stained glass, the grooves glimmer again for just a moment, like an ancient language trying to speak through the veil of faith, reminding the world that nothing sacred ever truly forgets. In the 12th century, a monk working in a Benedictine monastery near Florence left a note in the margin of a Latin manuscript. It reads, "Copied from the books of Ashurbanipal." No one knows why he wrote it or how he could have known that name, for the royal library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh had been buried beneath sand for more than 1500 years and would not be rediscovered until the 19th century. Yet the phrase is unmistakable. The monk believed he was working from living sources, not myths. The text he copied was a treatise on medicine, filled with strange symbols and unfamiliar terms. Some of those words would later be recognized as Akkadian. Scholars have long assumed that knowledge from the East reached Europe through Arabic translations during the Crusades, but this small note suggests a deeper and older chain, one linking medieval scriptoria directly to the vanished archives of Mesopotamia. The Royal Library of Ashurbanipal, assembled around 650 before Christ, contained tens of thousands of clay tablets from Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. When Nineveh fell, the tablets were shattered, buried, and lost to time, or so history tells us. But fragments began appearing in Europe centuries before any official excavation. A parchment in Canterbury references the letters of the kings of Nineveh. A codex in Toledo uses a symbol identical to the royal seal of Ashurbanipal. It is as though pieces of that forgotten library had quietly travelled west long before the Renaissance. How could that be? The answer may lie in the trade routes that linked Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean long before Rome rose to power. Merchants carried goods, but also scrolls and tablets, often sold as curiosities or sacred relics. Monks, hungry for knowledge, collected them. The earliest monasteries were not only places of worship, but repositories of text. Their scribes copied anything that survived, translating and adapting the contents into Latin. In doing so, they erased the names of gods and replaced them with Christian equivalents, yet the knowledge remained intact. Healing formulas once attributed to the goddess Gula became recipes for holy water. Astronomical charts marking the paths of Ishtar became diagrams for Easter. The chain of borrowing was so seamless that few ever noticed its origin. Somewhere within the Vatican archives, there are catalogue entries labelled Textus Ninuarum, the texts of Nineveh. Access to them is restricted, their content never made public. But rumours among scholars claim they contain direct translations of cuneiform tablets, preserved through monastic scriptoria for over 1,000 years. Perhaps the scribe in Florence was the last to remember where they came from. When he wrote the Books of Ashurbanipal, he was not making a metaphor. He was acknowledging a lineage of knowledge stretching back to the first library in human history. The monks may not have known the language they were copying, but they sensed its power. And so, through ink and candlelight, the Library of Nineveh lived on, its voice hidden in the very manuscripts that built the Western world, whispering from the margins of time. Deep within the nave of a forgotten abbey in northern Spain, the stone pillars rise like trees in a silent forest. Each column bears a carved capital, and on each capital rests a strange pairing of symbols: a bull facing a lion, a boat beside a cedar tree. To visitors, they are simply decorations from a lost age of symbolism, but to those who study ancient iconography, the sequence forms a pattern too deliberate to ignore. When viewed from the entrance and read left to right, these images align into what seems to be a mnemonic system, a code that transforms the church into a map. The bull represents the constellation Taurus. The lion stands for Leo, the cedar symbolizes the mountain of the gods from Sumerian myth, and the boat recalls the ark of Utnapishtim from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Each image corresponds to a celestial or geographical marker found in ancient Mesopotamian charts. When the images are plotted according to their order along the nave, they create coordinates that match a section of the Uruk star map. The alignment is exact down to the angle of the final pillar, which points toward the rising of Venus on the spring equinox. Historians have long assumed that medieval sculptors worked from biblical inspiration, but here the story is older. These capitals tell a journey, the same journey carved into the tablets of Gilgamesh, from the flood to the cedar forest to the gates of heaven. Somehow, that story was rebuilt in stone under the supervision of the church. The question is, why? A Jesuit scholar in the 17th century noted that certain churches were designed as teaching instruments, their architecture encoding mathematical and spiritual truths. Perhaps this abbey was one of them. The bull, the boat, the cedar, and the lion may not be decoration, but data points in an astronomical memory system that predates both Rome and Christianity. Some believe it was a way to hide forbidden knowledge in plain sight, using religious art as camouflage. The Vatican itself once commissioned artisans who were trained in classical symbolism, men who could merge pagan geometry with sacred imagery. The abbey's carvings may have been one of their quiet experiments, an attempt to preserve the star code of Uruk within a Christian structure. When the rising sun passes through the nave at dawn, the light travels from the bull to the lion to the cedar to the boat, tracing the same path as the ancient constellation of the sun's ascent. To those who know how to read it, the church becomes a clock, a compass, and a prayer all at once. The faithful kneel beneath the carvings, unaware that each stone records a fragment of the oldest story ever written. Perhaps the sculptor understood that to hide truth forever, you must place it where everyone will see it, but no one will look. The bull and the boat still stand there, watching silently, their gaze fixed toward the east, waiting for the morning when their secret will finally be noticed again. There is a reason the labyrinths carved into cathedral floors never lead anywhere. Pilgrims walk their winding paths in silence, tracing a journey to the center that promises revelation yet ends exactly where it began. But what if those spirals were never meant as symbols of faith alone? Beneath the polished stones of Chartres, Amiens, and Reims, a secret language has been hidden in plain sight for centuries. Each curve of the labyrinth, each measured step, aligns not with theology, but with language itself. In the late 1800s, a scholar named Henri Delatour noticed something peculiar while studying the Chartres labyrinth. The total number of steps to its center matched the syllable count of an ancient Sumerian hymn discovered decades later among the ruins of Nippur. The pattern seemed impossible until he realized that every twist in the labyrinth corresponded to a sound. By following the path and marking each turn as a vowel or consonant based on direction, the maze began to speak. It formed words, and when translated, those words mirrored a fragment of a Sumerian stanza once banned by the early church, a verse that described the creation of humanity not by divine breath, but by the mixing of clay and starlight. The church had long declared such texts heretical, yet here was the same knowledge encoded beneath the feet of the faithful. Some believe the architects of the great cathedrals knew exactly what they were building. The labyrinth was not simply a symbol of pilgrimage, it was a cipher disk, a living code designed to preserve forbidden truth through geometry. The masons who laid the stones followed measurements passed down through guilds whose origins reached beyond medieval Europe. Some even claimed descent from builders of Babylon. Their craft was guided by proportions that mirrored both scripture and starlight. The steps of the labyrinth were counted like verses in a psalm, yet each held a double meaning, one holy, one hidden. When sunlight strikes the floor through the stained glass at noon on the summer solstice, it illuminates the starting point of the labyrinth, activating what Delatour called the speaking path. Those who walk it carefully, pausing at each curve according to the rhythm of the chant inscribed in the cathedral's music, find that their footsteps form syllables. The sequence recreates a stanza once sung to the goddess Inanna in Uruk. No one inside the church would ever suspect that beneath their prayers, an ancient hymn to another heaven lay preserved in silence. Perhaps the architects understood that truth, like faith, must be walked, not read. Each pilgrim unknowingly retraces the steps of Gilgamesh himself, seeking a center that is not the heart of God, but the memory of humanity's first question. Why were we made? The labyrinth offers no answer. It only repeats the song that built it. A song older than stone, whispered in the rhythm of feet, still echoing across centuries beneath the vaulted ceilings of light. In the candlelit chambers of a Roman monastery, priests prepare the Eucharist, lifting bread and wine as symbols of the body and blood of Christ. Yet in one corner of the ritual, hidden in the rhythm of their prayers, lies a secret older than Christianity itself. Scholars examining fragments of liturgical texts from the 16th century noticed an unusual addition, a line describing a substance called bitumen alongside bread and wine. It was easy to overlook, dismissed as a metaphor for divine preservation. But the notation puzzled those familiar with Mesopotamian practices. In the temples of Uruk, priests offered a triad to the gods: bread, wine, and bitumen. The first two nourished, the last sealed. Bitumen was poured over clay tablets to protect them from flood, fire, and decay. The ritual was both a blessing and a preservation technique. When European monks included it in their own ceremonies, they were doing more than honouring God. They were encoding a procedure. Hidden in the blessing of bread and the consecration of wine was an instruction manual for sealing and unsealing archive vessels, a technique that ensured the survival of texts far older than their monastery walls. The secret was subtle. Bread represents the clay, wine the divine ink, and bitumen the protective seal. Perform the ritual in the correct sequence, and a hidden vault becomes accessible to those who know the code. In one document from the archives of the Jesuits in the early 1700s, the notation reads simply, "Offer the triad, speak the words, and the vessel will open." At first, historians assumed it was symbolic language for prayer, but laboratory testing on surviving manuscript containers revealed traces of resin and tar, perfectly aligned with ancient Mesopotamian sealing techniques. The Vatican possesses records showing that containers holding the oldest tablets from the East were treated in this way, each one marked not with letters, but with the proper ritual, performed by a trusted cleric who understood both scripture and star charts. Over centuries, the knowledge of bread, wine, and bitumen was codified into Mass, repeated daily, yet unnoticed. Monks were instructed to perform certain prayers over storage rooms and reliquaries, unaware that their movements activated a preservation mechanism older than Rome. It is said that Father Lorenzo, the Jesuit who spoke of the crate labelled Our Uruk, understood this triad. He whispered in his final confession that the same ritual that consecrates communion also keeps the memory of Uruk alive beneath the stone of the Vatican. The ancient and the sacred converge in silence. Every time the Eucharist is offered, the memory of the first temple offerings survives, encoded in the act of transformation, concealed in plain sight. Bread, wine, and bitumen are more than ritual objects. They are keys, a living bridge between the past and the present, ensuring that no flood, no fire, and no century can erase what was once written by the first kings of Uruk. In the great cathedral of Chartres, sunlight spills through stained glass, casting colours across the stone floors. Yet, when the winter solstice arrives, something stranger happens than the shifting of shadows. A careful listener standing in the choir notices the air itself hums in a peculiar way. The antiphonal placement of the singers, their voices arranged across the lofts in precise symmetry, creates interference nodes, points where sound waves overlap and amplify or cancel each other. These nodes are invisible, yet they can be felt, vibrating through the floor, walls, and pews. In the year 1574, Father Antonio Verdi, a Jesuit scholar with knowledge of ancient acoustics, noted that when a single vowel is sung at the proper pitch during the solstice mass, the sound travels along these nodes and strikes the apse in a precise pattern. To ordinary worshippers, it is beautiful music, ethereal and moving. To those who understand, it is a message. The projected sound outlines shapes, faint lines on the stone, corresponding to a key hidden for centuries, a code derived from the lost Sumerian tablets of Uruk. The apse becomes a screen, the cathedral itself a projector, translating air and architecture into a cipher. Verdi documented it carefully, noting the vowel, the step of each singer, and the precise distance to the altar. The pattern, projected onto the apse, was not random. It mirrored the arrangement of cuneiform on the original tablets, a sequence of wedges forming syllables, numbers, and instructions. The choir, unknowingly, became the link between past and present, carrying through centuries the sound of memory. No one else at the time could see or hear what he recorded, and his notes were locked in the Vatican archives, marked secretum, yet traces remained. Modern researchers using laser mapping and acoustic analysis have recreated the effect. The interference nodes align perfectly with the layout of the nave and transept. When a vowel is sustained, the resulting vibrations produce a map of the lost key, visible only as displacement in stone and sound, a memory etched in the cathedral itself. Some believe this was intentional. Medieval architects and musicians may have collaborated to encode knowledge that could survive through centuries, even when texts were destroyed or altered. The choir's shadow was a living record, activated by the faithful unknowingly performing the ritual. It preserved instructions for reading the clay tablets, for unlocking the secrets of the Our Uruk crate, and for tracing the paths of Gilgamesh across the stars. Every solstice, the process repeats, a silent ceremony of memory and mathematics. The sound is ephemeral, but its effect is permanent. The lost key pattern lies hidden in plain sight, a testament to human ingenuity, devotion, and the ancient desire to ensure that knowledge survives, even when written history forgets. And so the cathedral listens, its stones and air remembering what no human voice alone could carry for so long. In the late 15th century, a wandering pilgrim arrived at a monastery on the outskirts of Rome, carrying a staff carved with 12 deep notches. Each notch was worn smooth by decades of travel, yet the 13th was broken, jagged, and incomplete. The monks welcomed him, but they noticed the staff immediately. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. The wood was dark and heavy, unlike the local trees, and faint cuneiform symbols were etched along its length, barely visible beneath centuries of handling. The traveller spoke little, but he carried the air of one who had seen worlds forgotten by history. He said he came from Uruk, though no one could place such a journey in the maps of the time. When questioned, he offered only hints, gesturing to the notches and then to the broken space at the end. The monks, curious and cautious, began to map the staff against the monastery's layout. 12 notches corresponded to known chapels, altars, and shrines within the grounds. The broken 13th did not align with any existing location. Over time, a pattern emerged. The gap pointed directly toward a hidden chapel, walled off centuries earlier, its entrance sealed beneath layers of stone and mortar. Legends say that this chapel had once housed a single artifact, a tablet older than any known European text. The traveller refused to speak of it openly, but the monks observed that when he approached the chapel, the air seemed charged, a faint hum echoing from behind the walls. Years later, a cryptographer studying surviving records discovered sketches of the staff, showing the notches and the broken 13th. When plotted against the monastery's plans, the alignment suggested that the missing notch served as a key, indicating the location of the last tablet of the Uruk collection brought to Rome during the Counter-Reformation. Scholars speculate that the pilgrim's staff functioned both as a map and a cipher. The notches may have recorded journeys, astronomical observations, or ritual sequences, necessary to access the hidden archive. The broken 13th represents absence, a deliberate gap to protect the tablet from those uninitiated in the code. The tablet itself is rumoured to contain verses lost from the Epic of Gilgamesh, passages describing floods, kings, and stars, preserved only through the traveller's vigilance. Every pilgrim who walked the same path unknowingly traced the sequence, marking the hidden memory in their steps. The traveller's role was not merely to protect the artifact, but to ensure that the knowledge could be rediscovered when the right eyes, trained in both faith and ancient science, were ready. And so the staff remains a symbol of guidance, of journeys hidden in plain sight, and of the enduring link between Uruk and Rome. Those 12 notches and the jagged 13th continue to whisper across centuries, pointing towards secrets still concealed beneath the stone, waiting for someone who can read the language of travel, wood, and memory. In the clay tablets of Uruk, the story of Gilgamesh is not written linearly. Each wedge, each symbol, can be read forward or backward, producing two distinct narratives. One tells of the flood, the great deluge that swept over the cities, drowning kings and gods alike. The other, read in reverse, charts an ascent, the return of life, the journey of humanity, climbing again toward knowledge, civilization, and the stars. Modern scholars call this a palimpsest, a text written over itself. Yet those who have studied the original tablets believe it was deliberate, a design meant to preserve dual histories. When the Vatican archivists first received fragments in Rome during the 16th century, they understood the significance, but feared what the public might infer. The forward reading fit the narrative of sin and divine judgment. It reinforced the moral order, the authority of the Church, and the fragility of human life. The reverse reading, however, revealed secrets too powerful to release. It mapped an ascent of understanding, a hidden history of technology, mathematics, and astronomy preserved across millennia. To read the code is to navigate a mirror of time where the past and the future reflect each other. Each line forward collapses under the weight of catastrophe. Each line backward rises like a staircase into knowledge. It is a clever mechanism, for even as the flood erases one story, it preserves the other, hidden from eyes untrained in the subtleties of the cuneiform. Jesuits and monks, who copied the tablets over the centuries, were careful. They preserved the wedge shapes, never altering the sequence, but when translating for public use, they removed the reverse narrative. Only a select few were taught to read both directions, to understand that history is not one river flowing, but two streams braided together, one visible, one hidden. This mirrored structure is echoed in European cathedrals. The labyrinths on the floors, the light patterns through stained glass, and the placement of altars all trace the dual narrative. The flood is represented by shadow, by silence, by the stories the public is taught to remember. The ascent is encoded in light, in sound, in the rhythm of steps, preserved for those who know how to interpret it. The duality exists to protect knowledge while maintaining control. Forward, humanity fears divine wrath. Backward, it learns that wisdom, once lost, can be regained. The mirror of time teaches that every event has two meanings, every story two paths. In Rome, under layers of stone, candlelight, and ink, the Gilgamesh code remains intact, its flood washing over the world as the ascent quietly unfolds. To understand it fully is to glimpse both histories at once, to realize that the world we are shown is only one reflection, and that another, hidden reflection, may yet guide those who seek the truth. And in that mirror, the past is never truly gone. It waits, braided with the present, ready to rise again. In the earliest tablets of Gilgamesh, Enkidu is born from clay and wilderness, a figure untamed and unshaped by human law. He runs with animals, drinks from rivers, and sleeps beneath the stars. Yet when the story reaches the city, a woman named Shamhat teaches him language, clothing, and manners, guiding him into the fold of civilization. In the ancient code, this taming is more than a tale of friendship or adventure. It is a metaphor for the human mind, for the way memory itself is shaped over time. The wild man represents the untamed consciousness of humanity, unbound by instruction or doctrine, free to remember everything, to question everything. Civilization, represented by Shamhat and the walls of Uruk, intervenes to shape what should be remembered and what must be forgotten. In Rome during the 16th century, Jesuit scholars understood this deeply. They saw that controlling the narrative of the past was not merely about books or manuscripts, but about shaping collective memory, guiding the mind like Shamhat guided Enkidu. Every ritual, every lesson, every suppressed text was part of this taming. Monks and scribes selected which knowledge survived, which stories were allowed to circulate, and which fragments were hidden beneath stone or bitumen. Enkidu's transformation symbolizes the domestication of memory itself. He learns to speak, to walk in the city, to recognize kings and gods. Likewise, the lay mind is taught to recognize sanctioned history, to revere approved authorities, and to obey the rhythms of faith and law. Yet beneath that domestication, the wild persists. Hidden in the Vatican archives, in labyrinths, in the grooves of altars, and in the patterns of light through stained glass, are the memories that have been preserved, waiting for those who know how to awaken them. Enkidu's taming is not an end, it is a promise and a warning. Civilization cannot erase the wild entirely. It can only channel it, shape it, and, in some cases, hide it from plain sight. For the priests and scholars who understood the ancient tablets, the question was not whether knowledge could survive, but how it could be managed, controlled, and protected until the right moment. The wild man becomes a tool, a living metaphor for the balance between revelation and secrecy. And yet, the story itself remembers. Enkidu retains his strength, his connection to the natural world, and the echoes of that wildness seep through every encoded text, every hidden artifact, every ritual performed with careful care in Rome. When the mind is tamed, it does not vanish. It waits for the awakening, for the moment when the wild can rise again, guided by memory, by code, by the ancient hand that first shaped clay into a man. In that awakening, the past and present meet, and humanity glimpses the knowledge that was never truly lost. In a manuscript from the year 1598, preserved in a small Florentine monastery, a hagiography recounts the life of a saint whose miracles were said to coincide with a solar eclipse. The text is meticulous, recording the date and hour the prayers said by pilgrims, and even the expected shadow across the valley. Yet when astronomers recalculated the event using modern software, the sky above Florence was clear. No eclipse occurred. The document was accurate in every other way. Trees blossomed, rivers flowed, and the moon followed its path, but the sky refused the story. Scholars were baffled for centuries, dismissing it as clerical error or exaggeration. Then, in the archives of the Vatican, a hidden annotation was discovered beside the passage. Faint Latin script read simply, "Consider 2 centuries earlier." When astronomers recalculated for that adjusted date, the eclipse appeared precisely as described. The sun and moon aligned perfectly over the city, casting the shadow exactly as the text had promised. The manuscript was not wrong, history had been shifted. The code embedded in the story instructed the reader to look back, to find the celestial truth hidden beneath the public timeline. This practice is not isolated. Across Europe, similar discrepancies exist in monastic records, liturgical calendars, and saintly chronicles. Eclipses, comets, planetary conjunctions, all recorded events occasionally refuse to obey the expected date. The Gilgamesh Code, preserved through centuries of tablets and monasteries, seems to guide the historian to the correct alignment, often centuries earlier than the text would imply. In this case, the eclipse becomes a hidden marker, a temporal waypoint preserved for those who understand the sequence. The saint's miracle is not merely a story of faith, but a pointer to cosmic memory. The adjustment of 200 years is deliberate. It ensures that the sacred alignment falls within the reach of the Church, under papal observation, and within the framework of encoded knowledge transmitted from Uruk. Modern researchers have found that these shifts correspond to other markers: cathedral orientations, labyrinth floors, and choir interference nodes. The story, the architecture, and the celestial event all speak the same language, a language of timing, alignment, and preservation. The public reads a miracle, a symbol of divine favor. The initiated read a calendar, a code, and a map of the heavens, the stars. In refusing to appear on the expected date, preserve the secrecy of the knowledge. They demand patience, study, and obedience to the sequence set by those who understood it first. When the correct centuries are consulted, the patterns emerge, revealing the dual histories hidden within the manuscripts. The saints, the eclipses, and the codes all intertwine, creating a rhythm that guides seekers across time. And so the day the stars refused becomes a lesson not of error, but of careful concealment. It reminds those who study the past that history is never fully what it seems. Sometimes one must look beyond the page, beyond the event, and trace the alignment hidden in the sky centuries before the world was ready to remember. In the vaulted silence of a cathedral, where sunlight filters through centuries-old stained glass, the seventh gate lies hidden. Scholars have long debated its existence, whispered about in the margins of Jesuit journals and monastic treatises. It is not a physical door, but a convergence, a place where chant meter, labyrinth steps, and star points align to reveal the final stanza of the Gilgamesh Code. When sung correctly, a single vowel resonates through interference nodes in the choir, vibrating along the labyrinth floor. Each step taken along the spiral corresponds to a syllable, each syllable marking a star that once guided Uruk. For centuries, this sequence remained unbroken yet unintelligible to anyone uninitiated. The final stanza, once decrypted, is not merely poetry, it is a directive, a mandate buried in time, telling humanity to restore its measure above the edict of celestial and clerical authority. The text instructs that knowledge, once confined, must be returned to human hands, that the flow of memory and discovery cannot be shackled by the calendar or the pulpit. In 1562, Father Lorenzo, a Jesuit who spent decades studying the Ur-Uruk tablets, recorded in secret that the seventh gate had been partially opened during a midsummer solstice. He described the air vibrating, the stone floor responding, and the faintest light glimmering along cuneiform grooves hidden beneath the altar mensa. Those who observed were sworn to silence, yet Lorenzo hinted that the gate's opening was a key to reclaiming history itself. The stanza reveals that the human measure, the capacity to question, to calculate, to remember, is sovereign over the imposed rhythm of centuries. The code is clear: no calendar, no ecclesiastical decree, no artificially extended century can dictate the flow of understanding. It is a call to awaken the wild mind, to allow Enkidu to rise, untamed yet guided, to restore balance between what has been recorded and what has been erased. Architects, astronomers, and scribes across Europe participated unknowingly, embedding fragments of this directive in cathedrals, altars, labyrinths, and choir harmonics. The seventh gate unites them, revealing that all these seemingly isolated measures were orchestrated to survive centuries of oversight. When the steps are retraced, the vowel sung, and the star points aligned, the hidden stanza emerges in clarity. It instructs the reader to recognize the continuity of human thought, the survival of knowledge across floods, fires, and inquisitions. The gate does not open a treasure chest or a secret room. It opens the mind to its own history, showing that memory and wisdom are never fully lost. They wait, encoded in ritual, architecture, and song, for those patient and perceptive enough to find them. In the light of dawn, when the sun strikes the apse and the labyrinth echoes with footsteps, the seventh gate stands revealed. It is not merely a moment of discovery, but a restoration, a recognition that human measure, preserved and reclaimed, surpasses the edicts of time and authority, and that the story of Gilgamesh, once hidden, is now ready to guide again. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Vatican, past the corridors lined with centuries of books, maps, and manuscripts, lies a small chamber few have ever seen. It is quiet, untouched by the clamour of visitors or the rituals of priests. Candlelight flickers against stone walls, revealing shelves filled with clay tablets, each marked with wedges that have survived millennia. Ink and bitumen preserve their messages, faint but unbroken. This is the room where the Gilgamesh Code finally comes to rest, its last line waiting silently to be read. Unlike the grand reveals described in myths or sensational stories, there is no thunder, no shaking of the earth, no dramatic unveiling. Instead, there is only the soft hum of air, the faint creak of wood, and the slow heartbeat of time passing over ancient clay. Scholars who have glimpsed the tablets report a sense of stillness that is almost unnatural. The wedges are precise, deliberate, yet they do not command, they ask. The final line of the code does not demand obedience, does not decree power or authority. It poses a question, a quiet inquiry meant not for Rome, not for any church or empire, but for us. Will we keep time, or let time keep us? The phrase is simple yet profound. It challenges the reader to consider the way history has been measured, manipulated, and preserved. The centuries of silence, the purges of texts, the careful orchestration of knowledge, all of it culminates here in a question of agency. Every step taken to study the tablets, every rotation of the labyrinth, every note sung in choir interference nodes leads to this moment. The room itself seems to breathe with the weight of human memory, reminding those who enter that the past is never truly gone. It is encoded, layered, waiting for those who are patient enough, observant enough, and curious enough to understand. The light under the vault does not illuminate a treasure, it illuminates choice. In 1523, a Jesuit archivist named Matteo recorded a note in the margin of one tablet. He wrote of the last line and added that it is not only a question of time, but of responsibility. What we do with knowledge, how we preserve memory, and whether we act on what has been hidden determines not just our understanding of history, but our ability to shape the future. The clay tablets have survived empires, fires, floods, inquisitions, and centuries of silence. They carry within them a rhythm older than Rome and older than the Church. And yet, the final measure belongs to us. To read it is to confront ourselves, to decide whether we will allow time to dictate our understanding or whether we will claim the stewardship of knowledge as our own. The room remains quiet, the light steady, the clay unyielding. The last line does not answer, it asks. And in that question, the Code of Gilgamesh, preserved beneath the vault for thousands of years, finally completes its work. It waits, patient, eternal, and entirely in our hands.